damage that the coronavirus can cause. Extract from the 743rd contact of June 16, 2020. Translated with deephell.com. Disclaimer: this is an unofficial translation.
As for the leaders whom you call mindless, irrational and intelligent, I can also understand this and agree with you. Because in fact the majority of people who hold state power are absolutely incapable of effective real governance. On the contrary, it is absolutely incapable of taking action and exercising control over the running of a state, and certainly not in any way predestined to control a crisis situation and to initiate and carry out all the necessary and correct measures, as would have been necessary and inevitable in the case of the corona epidemic. I must, however, mention this again now, even if we do not want to talk about it anymore, because this is how it was and still is, as you say, because, to date, in practically every country in the world, a total of over 1 million people have died as a result of the pandemic since June 2019. But only 500 of these will be officially announced by the end of this June, while the number of unreported cases will not be mentioned. The number of official deaths alone will continue to rise and will very quickly exceed 600 which we expect to be towards the end of July next year, but this will not mean the end of the epidemic. This is because the whole thing is going to continue and will increase even further as a result of carelessness and stupidity on the part of the leaders who, acting without understanding, reason or responsibility, will order the lockdown measures, which are already inadequate, to be relaxed or even ended. On the other hand, however, there is also the majority of the population that will act irresponsibly and oppose the preventive measures against reason and common sense, which will cause the epidemic to rise again in the coming weeks, spread again and cause many deaths. When I now talk about the fact that the number of deaths is continuing to rise, Europe will, for the time being, be less affected than many other countries in the world. But the foolish action of relaxing or abandoning safety measures will have serious consequences and will lead to a renewed increase in infections and deaths, as well as necessitating the reintroduction of new measures such as lockdowns and compulsory wearing of masks, etc. In the United States in particular, where Donald Trump, the crazed leader of the state, is continuing to drive forward the corona disaster caused by his incapacity to govern, his megalomania and his devastating machinations that endanger public health, the whole thing is progressing in an increasingly lethal manner, as is the case in Brazil with the autocratic President Bolsonaro. Trump is a sociopathic or psychopathic person, who is completely limited and incapable of feeling compassion for his fellow human beings or any living creature, let alone being able to empathize with others in any way. Trump is absolutely incapable of weighing the consequences of his foolhardy and impudent speeches and his fickle and confused decisions, which he often recalls in a matter of seconds, or his orders and actions. Just as he cannot control his confused and pathological errors and graces, Trump is also fundamentally incapable of defining reality and fiction, and as a result of his stupidity he is slowly but surely destroying the social system and the otherwise already ailing political structure in the USA, as well as in other countries around the world. Effectively, he is the most dangerous man in the world, who provokes and causes all-around discord, terror and ruin as well as destruction and war, as well as hundreds of thousands of deaths in the population of the United States of America itself, and this as a result of his pathological inability to think, his stupidity, his lack of reason and reasonableness, self-importance, arrogance and megalomania. The corona epidemic will continue to spread worldwide, but some 40 states will remain particularly hard hit by the disease for a long time and will continue to bring much suffering to the human race on Earth.
If I can come back to Trump, if he is still addicted to stupidity, then I wouldn't be surprised. But now that we are already at the corona plague, I want to ask you if you can look through the contents of this list here and tell me if it is complete or if there is anything else to add. Minister ... has sent it to me.
What you say is not Trump, but he is so damaged in terms of his consciousness that he is incapable of rethinking coordinative necessary facts, putting them together, ordering them, drawing the right conclusions from them and implementing them in an evaluative manner.
Aha, to come to the same conclusion as I did, because I have studied the guy, his whole behavior and attitudes a little bit, and in this respect I have made the statement that he does not have any coordinative abilities in his consciousness, therefore he does not have any disposition and a free use of mind and reason in any area of his speech, behavior and actions. For this, no consciousness-related prerequisite is inherent in him, which is why he is also not able to overlook a situation and not to judge it, because in his hollow brain he lacks any ability for coordinated thought processes. From this, it necessarily follows that he is not able to grasp, not to judge, not to understand and not to coordinate a situation, thing, crisis, event or product, etc., which is arising or existing and which is visible to every consciously unhindered normal human being, according to his lack of intelligence, in relation to his distinctly weak mind and his lack of reason. What he has achieved in his life and may continue to achieve in the future, in my opinion, depends in some unworthy way on his lack of intelligence, but above all on the ignorance and stupidity of those who fall for his fuss, his big mouth, intrigues, lies, acting, underhandedness, and fraudulent gain for themselves.
You are a good student of my father's faith. Your judgment really only allows what is really given by this man who is incapable of leadership and very dangerous for the world. In the leaderships there are effectively only a few people who are devoted to reason, logic and righteousness, for the majority of the leaders are only in name, but not in reality and truth. Most of the world's leaders are not leaders, but only those who exercise power in an autocratic manner, who, as you sometimes say, are walking over corpses, as is currently the case throughout the world, in the sense that, by the end of this month, the corona epidemic will have affected more than 500,000 people, and then, in a few weeks' time, there will be more than 600,000, as our forecast has shown. And for this, on the one hand, the blame will fall on the majority of all the world's powerful states, because they are incapable, and have been incapable from the outset, of taking all the necessary precautions and security measures. On the other hand, however, the majority of the population itself will also bear a great deal of the blame, because it is indifferent, stupid, pleasure-seeking and irresponsible and disregarding, negating and trivializing the danger of epidemics, which will bring infection to many and death to a large number of people. Coming back to what you said about those in charge of the state, it is indeed the case that a majority of them are incapable of assuming their responsibilities. Despite their physical adulthood, these people are no more than adolescent children, and thus, in terms of their entire cognition, or rather, in terms of understanding, reason, logic and the ability to make the right decisions and act, they are ungrown, uneducated and, as a result of their lack of ability to think, very stupid and therefore also unpredictable.
This is also known in the governments by people who cannot assert themselves, because they are disregarded or simply shouted down by those who are domineering, as you can read here from this letter which Lord ... wrote to me. I have told you about him several times and have also shown you some of his letters, but unfortunately I always have to destroy them, as you know, because he has to remain unrecognized as a member of the state leadership.
You're talking about Minister?
No, this man first came to me for years. Then to Guido, although he was very religious, he, too, had to hide his visits to me and Guido over all these years, because if anyone in his circles had known that he was in contact with us and came to us for advice, he would have been shunned as a government official. But now he had died, Bernadette said. This man here, however, is another one who is also Prime Minister, a friend of ...
The man didn't die, as Bernadette says, but he just doesn't come to the center anymore, because Guido, with whom he had become a special friend, died. But when I now read this letter, then this man confirms, ... exactly what we have been finding out again and again for months, but about which all those who are involved keep silence. They do not dare to say that they are reading their information from your Figu website and that they are saying it to themselves in public.
You have already said this on several occasions. But as you can see here, he wants to call me, as he always announces, on ... But nobody must hear what is being said. And he calls me on my secret phone, because it's safer. What he writes here on the list, which I already mentioned, he now wants to have more information about, which is why I want to read it to you. He also writes here that we owe you and us a big thank you for the early information regarding the listed complaints that are coming out of the corona epidemic. He now asks if the main symptoms he has listed here are complete or if there are some things that need to be added, which I will have to ask you separately in order to give him a proper answer. What I want to say now is that, according to the information you have given me, I have specifically mentioned some things to him by telephone, which are not particularly mentioned in the reports of the conversations. In his list you will find the following.
1. Disease pathogens are transmitted through the air in closed rooms. 2. Coronaviruses are carried further by outdoor wind than by calm wind, therefore larger distances from person to person must be observed. 3. If people stand too close together, there is a risk of infection, including when unsuitable simple masks are worn. The coronavirus can cause slight or severe organic damage such as 4. Damage to the lungs. 5. Damage to the heart. 6. Damage to the coronary vessels. 7. Damage to the heart valve. 8. Damage to the airways. 9. Damage to the kidneys. 10. Damage to the brain. 11. Damage to consciousness. 12. Damage to the pancreas. 13. Damage to blood vessels. 14. Damage to the mucous membranes. 15. Damage to the limbic system. 16. Damage can affect all organs at all. 17. There is no lifelong immunity against the coronavirus. 18. The coronavirus will continue to exist for all time after the end of the pandemic. 19. There is no herd immunity. 20. Once ill with corona and recovered, does not protect against a new infection. 21. Once recovered from corona, it can be fatal in case of further infection. 22. Even mild corona diseases can cause various organic ailments. 23. Various organic diseases caused by the coronavirus are stored unrecognizable in the organs and years or decades after recovery can cause completely different cause suffering and disease. 24. The coronavirus in the human body has a long-term effect. 25. The coronavirus also infects domestic animals and all other mammals, but also partly.
So this is the list of ... for which he writes and asks if there is anything more to be said about it openly, but for which I will ask you later, because he is still asking some things here that should not be discussed openly. But here he asks who is really to blame for the corona pandemic, because he is not really clear about that. because I told him on the telephone that China alone is not guilty, because the majority of all governments and populations of all states worldwide have failed completely, including Germany, and he then asked what happened to Switzerland. I also told him that the majority of the Swiss government and population had failed like everyone else. I also answered his question about the story that the coronavirus caused the epidemic through a pangolin animal on a market in Wuhan truthfully, that this was a lie, because this false assertion is really a lie and the epidemic was carried off from a secret laboratory. I took the liberty of telling the minister that the origin of the disease can be traced back to an order from Mao Zedong, who in the 1970s, even before his death, joined with the American ... in an evil plot to research and produce an epidemic agent in laboratories, which was then to be imported into the USA by the American and cause a deadly epidemic there. This is revenge for the fact that he, the American ... could have taken revenge for what ...
You should keep quiet about that.
I did, too, because I didn't mention his name, because I'm only mentioning it to you. Nor did I say what the American's reason was that he was negotiating something so vengeful with Mao, who also had a hell of a hatred for the powerful people of the USA, which is why he got into the revenge plan. Mao was an unparalleled hater of America, and when she went to see him, she told him that he would personally massacre any American who came into his hands. She told me that Mao was furious because he knew through intelligence that the powerful USA were planning an insane war to conquer the world, and that they wanted to drop no less than 12,000 atomic bombs in there, destroying the world and razing everything to the ground. The whole thing was to happen in Europe, the Soviet Union and China, which would also wipe out millions of civilian populations. To this end, many US bombers were already on the move worldwide for a long time, day and night, without interruption, and could have struck at any time and plunged the Earth's surface into a lunar landscape and into nuclear contamination. He also told me, that Mao Zedong saw the USA as a world criminal state, which since time immemorial provoked war, murder, manslaughter and terror all over the world, interfered everywhere politically and secretly in foreign countries, shifted huge masses of weapons to crisis countries and thus promoted insurrections and wars in these countries through US Secret Service machinations, only to creep into these countries and their governments.
Whatever else Mao Zedong told us about Mao Zedong shortly before his death, was also recorded by her, so I am fully informed about it and can say that the Americans' plan of revenge, is now finally being fulfilled, even if very belatedly. Today, however, it is not the then guilty, but innocent people who must atone for what, was done, i.e., people in America who have no idea what the origins of the corona epidemic really are, and that the real culprit died decades ago, and that the corona epidemic is a posthumous revenge for dirty American governmental machinations.
But because practically the whole world has failed to deal with the outbreak of the corona pandemic, by the majority of all governments and populations, because they have not taken the right protective measures and consequently none have been implemented, disaster could result. It is only because of this that the corona pandemic was able to form and spread rapidly throughout the world. But nobody wants to talk about this today, and blame China alone. Even if the corona pandemic was basically started from China, the whole world is to blame because it did not act correctly and responsibly. China and its government were only at the origin and can be blamed for this, because nothing was done and nothing was done laxly. But as far as the whole world is concerned, the blame for the spread of the disease lies with the majority of all governments and peoples who would have been responsible for containing the whole thing before the pandemic could have occurred.
That's so.